We tend to sometimes assume these things have been figured out. I think that has caused sometimes more harm than good. Historically, the discourse around climate change started in the global north, even ESG.
I know we have things like severe droughts, unpredictable rain, increasing temperatures. What are the not so obvious implication of climate change in a place like Tanzania?
Disease burden, right? And in particular, malaria.
Climate adaptation and climate mitigation. Is it the same thing or are these two different things? Climate change has the ability to slow down economic growth by about 4% by the year 2050. What does this actually mean?
As Tanzania, two of our largest competitive advantages are, you could say we have a very young workforce. Great, let's make them all get into AI because this is the recent trend, right? But nature-based solutions offer an opportunity for very valuable employment, particularly in rural areas, and for jobs that have modest requirements.
Could you explain to me what nature-based solutions are?
So nature-based solutions, suluhu asili as we call them in Swahili, it simply refers to any... We've been implementing nature-based solutions since the Historically, the financing has been sitting in the global north, technical capacity, and there's been a lack of local intermediaries or local actors who are playing that part. It's changing. The interesting part is the opportunities we're seeing across the continent. Leave agriculture alone, because everyone probably focuses on that. The other two really promising areas for nature-based solutions, actually I'd say three. One really interesting model is how do you think about a tree as an asset?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Christopher Shire, and I'm excited to invite you to another episode of Sustainability Bongo. Over here, we have conversations with leaders, innovators, representatives of organizations, with the main aim of really understanding just how relevant the sustainability agenda is here in Tanzania. So what we try to do here is we demystify concepts, we talk about myths, we put a spotlight on people and initiatives that are already happening in the country, all with the aim of answering that one question of, is sustainability actually relevant? Hapa Bongo, right? Thanks to CEO Roundtable and IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, through the Resolve NbS program, who have made this a possibility. And we're excited to continue to decode the sustainability story in Tanzania. Today, we're going to be having a conversation about the environment. And we're going to be specifically talking about the climate. I have the pleasure to bring to you an incredible leader who has been in this space for a little over 7 years, I believe, by now. And he is none other than the executive director of BIRA, which is the Biodiversity Investment Researcher and Accelerator. But he's also the country co-director and an associate partner at Axum, specifically handling the nature-based solution portfolio. And he's also the co-founder of the Tanzanian Climate Network. As you can tell, we're going to have a lot of fun today because this is someone who knows what they're doing, and I'm excited to ask all the questions that are related to the climate agenda hapa Bongo. This is none other than Syakaa William. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Karibu sana sana to Sustainability Bongo.
It is good to be here, and let's try and answer that question.
Okay, sawa. So generally speaking, I think the understanding is that sustainability is, first of all, only about the environment or the climate, which is not the truth. And I think we'll definitely have many avenues where we talk about that. But today specifically, I would really want us to talk about the climate situation in Tanzania and all of the wonderful things that you're doing in relation to nature-based solutions. So to kick things off, I know we have things like, severe droughts, unpredictable rain, and things like increasing temperatures that we often associate with the climate situation. But I think what I want to ask you is, what are the not so obvious implication of climate change in a place like Tanzania?
Cool. Non-obvious implications. Good question. I have to think about it because it is non-obvious, but I'll start with one that's top of mind. Disease burden, right? And in particular, malaria. Growing up, it used to be malaria was mainly a coastal burden, right? The islands. And historically, that was driven by the fact that temperatures here were warm enough to allow mosquitoes to thrive. Now, over the last couple of decades, that has changed drastically. Where I grew up in Mbeya, we still have the cold, and it's really cold when it's cold. But now, hot seasons are not that different in Morogoro, in Mbeya, in Dar, right? And what that does is it allows mosquitoes to now breed in those environments. Now, people who no longer were burdened by things like malaria are being impacted by them, right? Dengue and a couple of other of these other diseases as well. That is one. The other one would be potentially transportation challenges and delays. This is something people, particularly in Dar, don't face. But if you're a farmer, if you're in rural areas, you know that people's whole seasons, agricultural outputs, sometimes get lost because during the rain season, the roads just can't get there. Now, that has always been an issue. The reason why climate change is making that worse is because now we have more unpredictable rain seasons. You could plan around it previously. Now you may be caught with a rain season in the middle of your harvesting cycle. So those are some of the non-obvious climate change impacts. There's probably a long list that we could go on and on about, though.
Well, that's so interesting. I've never really thought about it like that. So what you're saying is, let's say, for example, in relation to the increasing temperatures, there is a burden to some diseases being a lot more prevalent in some areas than not. It's one of those things that you don't really think about. But
and two more that I'll mention actually. Now that we're on a roll, one is I would say is electricity generation. Right, we are thankfully in terms of renewables very heavily dependent on hydro. But there's also a risk with hydro resources when your entire grid is based off that. During long, prolonged droughts, is you have no alternative, right? And we often hear this at times where the government then says, hey, we haven't had rains for a while, now we have to go rations. Although thankfully with Stigler's, we're now producing potentially a bit above our demand, but that risk still remains, right? Another one is human productivity. The numbers are not great. Apparently, ideal human temperature for functioning is 23 degrees. We've all felt that, if you've had a heavy lunch, it's hot outside. The only thing you can really do is nap, right? Now think about how many kids are in school at that time with no proper ventilation systems, and this is when they're supposed to be learning. And sometimes, at least for my school, math was right after lunch. So I really struggled for a while with maths because of that, and it's going to get worse, although some people are doing some things about it. But some of the non-obvious impacts of climate change there.
That is so interesting because I remember just last night actually I came across this report by the World Bank Group, and they were saying specifically for Tanzania, climate change has the ability to slow down economic growth by about 4% by the year 2050, which also happens to be the year for our Dira 2050. And I just thought that was really interesting. And then also in that same report, it also mentioned something to the effect of climate change could potentially push 2.6 million people into poverty also by 2050. And I think for me, the reason I was asking about the not so obvious implications, that to me was not obvious, right? When I think about rain, when I think about heat, maybe I'm just thinking about my own, comforts in the cities, but then there's also very, very real implications as to what this actually means for Tanzania as a whole, which is I think something that definitely needs to be spoken about more.
Very much so. My journey in this, and I'll tell a quick story. About 8 years ago, I was put on a field assignment. I was about 2 hours out of Arusha in this small village interviewing farmers. And one of my last interviews of the day, I go talk to this farmer. get to his farm, his house. His house is there. He has this huge store, and there's a lot of land you see in the back. There's some chickens there, and he's this very welcoming guy. Offers me some maize, some boiled maize. Like, we start having a conversation. And he tells me basically his life story over the last 10 years or so. And this was a guy who was one of the larger producers of maize in that village. The village had undergone some droughts. The government had invested in putting in some basins, some dams to collect water. Those had dried out. The guy could no longer take care of his family because his crops were failing. Started selling off pieces of his land, sold off his livestock, sold off his motor vehicles. And by the time I was speaking to him, he basically just had this big storehouse that was empty because there was nothing in it. And that store, I still get images of it, sort of a testament to previous success. And seeing a man who was once very successful, fed his family, took care of them, now not knowing what tomorrow holds, right? And his thinking was, okay, if I can't make next cycle, I'll have to sell this warehouse as well, if someone will buy it off him. And that put to reality the lived experiences of this person. He didn't even know what climate change was, right? He didn't have the words to put his experiences around, but it was a reality of what he experienced. So it is something that for a lot of us we don't see. We tend, particularly in urban areas, to see it in different ways. When it starts raining, that is a nightmare to get anywhere on. We, at least people have now been relocated from the Msimbazi Basin, but that was a place where we get frequent flooding. We're going to be getting into places where heat stress is now a thing. We're already seeing it in India, where they get heat waves, and many people die en masse because they have nowhere to get shade, they can't get water. If you think about low-income neighborhoods, particularly people who need the support the most, those are the most vulnerable, right? They live in places without ventilation, right? Like all tin roofs, sometimes no windows in the house, right? So it is there. It is, although, a thing that people have not put a lot of spotlight or visibility on.
That's very interesting that you should say that, because what I'm hearing, and especially coming from the communication and marketing space, and maybe even from the media side as well, is perhaps there's not a lot of spotlight that is on these very serious situations. And like you said, I think the example that you gave of India also reminded me of something else. I didn't know that this was a thing, but I read there's some sort of a ranking that shows just how ready countries are for climate change. And I think on that particular report, there was 191 countries, and Tanzania was ranked, I believe, 45 or 40 something, which I think, what does that mean? Does that mean like we're just not ready for climate change? And what does it, how can we be ready? I don't know if that's a...
The numbers tell one story. Sometimes it's not the complete story, but what that number should tell you is, and the number I'll throw next to that is our vulnerability index. We are one of the most vulnerable nations. I think we're 100 and something in vulnerability, but we're 45 apparently in preparedness. What that should tell you is we have moved through some things to actually improve resilience. And the government has actually tried through both the Vice President's office, which oversees the environment. The private sector as well is moving forward with sort of solutions. But I would say, given how vulnerable we are, we should probably be higher on that list in terms of preparedness, right? If we're in the bottom 10 of vulnerability, we should be in the top 10 of preparedness, right? But it is something that we should all be working towards.
So I want to just piggyback on what you said. What is, for someone like me who doesn't fully understand vulnerability, preparedness, like what does this actually mean for us? Does it mean there's some areas that, let's say when it floods, it has a higher chances of experiencing damage than not? And also, how do you sort of measure readiness or preparedness, if you will?
So vulnerability, I would define it as a function of two things. One is how likely an event is to happen, and when it happens, how severe it is, right? We are very vulnerable because there's very high chances of impacts on both fronts. We have one of the longest coastal zones on this side of the continent, which means increased risk of flooding, particularly as ocean levels rise. At the same time, we have a large percent of our land, agricultural land, that is degraded and is under threat of desertification. So within that, there's already, as you can see, both high likelihood because we have so much of these resources and we're so dependent on them. And when they happen, they can be very bad. Preparedness then means how prepared are you for preventing those bad things happening? And within that, there are some areas, particularly in our agricultural sector, where we've been building a lot of resilience, but we tend to forget sort of the other sectors that are supplementary to agriculture and non-ag sectors that also need to build preparedness.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing is the number one, the climate crisis is very real, even for us in Tanzania. Two is there is a way in which we can assess where we are and what it is that we need to do, which kind of leads me to another thing that I wanted to ask, because in that same, I think it was called the Country Climate and Development Report, they also mentioned that the correct climate action has the potential of boosting the GDP by like 0.5% by the year 2050. First of all, please explain to me if you explain to me what that means. But secondly, I also really want to understand what climate action means, because we keep hearing things like climate mitigation, climate adaptation, but it all sounds like jargon to me and to a lot of people, I believe. So if you could speak on that, I'd really appreciate that.
So I'll try to answer both at once. And I'll talk through at least why, particularly for me, nature-based solutions are something that should be on the agenda for most African governments, including ours. Is right now, if you think about economies, right, we need to build economies on competitive advantages. As Tanzania, I would argue two of our largest competitive advantages are large and abundant natural resources and a large young workforce. I don't know, people can argue against those. Those for me are two largest competitive advantages. Now, as you think about this, you have to think about how do you use them, right? For them to be a resource, they should be used. Now, there's many ways of particularly job creation, as you think about that large and abundant workforce, but nature-based solutions offer an opportunity for very valuable employment, particularly in rural areas, and for jobs that have modest requirements, right? You could say we have a very young workforce. Great, let's make them all get into AI because this is the recent trend, right? But then there's a question of most of our young people struggle with sort of literacy and numeracy at a very competent level, right? Unless they've gone through school. The numbers recently were showing almost half of the graduating class of the last secondary school had dropped out between Form 1 and Form 4, right? So what do we do with that half of the population, right? Do they all come to die and struggle to find jobs as day workers? No, we need to create meaningful employment opportunities in rural areas. And what is meaningful opportunity there right now is within nature-based solutions and agriculture in particular, right? So the idea of it could boost our economy by 0.5%, 5%, whatever that number could be, is based on the fact that we will be creating new industries of growth, right? New may not be the word for it, but we're putting momentum into industries that can really create jobs at scale, particularly in rural areas for young people and young women. Now that in itself will boost our economy, right? There's additional benefits to it to say, as you're building these industries, climate action is around solving problems related to climate change, right? And realizing opportunities that come with it. So in part of it, addressing the problems that come with it includes, say, regenerative agriculture, which says we are using degraded soils. How can we keep farming, but farming in ways that actually builds the health of soils over time. So now instead of getting 6 bags an acre of maize, you're getting 15 bags, right? You're already doubling incomes by improving the ability of the land to produce. And then there is saying, how do we create new industries of growth, right? So nowadays, carbon markets is a word most people hear, right? Transactions going in the hundreds of billions. Tanzania is a country with large potential for carbon development. We've created our carbon guidelines now. NCMC is becoming an institution to help oversee that. But as you think about that, our project development pales to the contrast of the likes like Kenya, which is actually more constrained physically, geographically compared to us, but they're pushing more volumes and more foreign investments is coming into that market for carbon project development, right? How do you think about things like green energy and green manufacturing? You have conscious consumers now who want zero product t-shirts, right? I want my t-shirt to have no emissions, right? Doing that requires you to have an industry in a place that uses renewable energy, right? We have the opportunities for that, so we could build into these industries. So I'm not competing with Bangladesh on a t-shirt because I can't get to their price point. I'm competing on them on better impact for the product, right? It's a higher quality product because it has no emissions or zero emissions associated with it, or you've mitigated your emissions, right? So both the opportunity to address existing problems and that creating economic impact, but also the opportunity to tap into new industries and that also driving more impact.
I want to take you back on so many points,
Please.
but we're gonna take it one step at a time, right? So first of all, could you explain to me what nature-based solutions are?
Yes.
Because you mentioned it, and I think I mentioned it too when I was doing the intro. But I'm really keen to understand what it is in the first place, and then I'll carry on to the points you made about our 2 biggest resources, which I tend to agree with. So let's start with the NbS part.
Yeah. So nature-based solutions, suluhu asili, as we call them in Swahili, it simply refers to any action that uses a natural system to solve a challenge. Right? Natural systems, land, air, water, anything that uses that to solve a problem is a nature-based solutions. We've been implementing nature-based solutions since the ages of our forefathers. We just didn't have the words to put around them again, right? It's things like saying, I am farming next to a water, like a river. Let me put some terraces to avoid erosion, or let me plant a mango tree next to my maize, right? The mango tree serves some function, provides shade, can also provide nutrients and improves soil health, prevents erosion, right? So all of these are natural solutions. It could be even as simple as I need to refrigerate my cassava. I don't have a fridge. I need to store it. I don't have a fridge. I will dig a hole in the ground and put the cassava there, put the top back on, put some water and go to bed, right? That's natural refrigeration that actually happens in most parts of rural Tanzania. That counts as a nature-based solutions.
Right. So it's basically solutions that are based on natural means or nature. Okay. That I think sometimes, at least the initial times when I was hearing that, to me, it almost felt like it has to be something that has to do with smart agriculture and all of these things. But in reality, based off of this understanding, you can have nature-based solutions that are outside even the field of
you probably have a nature-based solutions at home, right? Like if you plant trees to give yourself shade, right? People nowadays do gardens on top of their houses to minimize cooling costs because that lowers heat. That's a nature-based solution.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So as long as it's solving a challenge using nature, it's a nature-based solution. Okay, I want to also go back to what you were saying earlier, which I tend to agree with, about us having a young population as a competitive advantage, but also us having vast resources across the country. And I think if I understood you correctly, I'm just repeating to make sure that I understood you correctly, the opportunity to up or the economic growth could happen if we are able to tap into the youth, to tap into the young people, to put them on roadmaps that lead them to industries or spaces where they can use nature-based solutions to solve challenges that are already existing. I think the example you gave about the t-shirts is a really good one, but I also wanted to debunk it a bit because you did mention zero emissions based off of t-shirts. Just for my understanding, and maybe for a listener who's listening, the goal ultimately is to sort of reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, correct? And so when we talk about, now this was, I think the second part of my question was trying to understand when people say climate adaptation and climate mitigation, is it the same thing or are these two different things?
Different. So adaptation is about how we adapt to changing climate. So how do we continue be productive humans when we are living at 29 degrees centigrade as our normal, right? That's adaptation.
Okay.
Mitigation is how do we prevent those effects of climate change, right? So things like let's reforest, let's go and put back our forests, right? So afforestation, those are sort of mitigation. It's not about how we adapt; it's about how do we prevent further damage or how do we do better. Yeah.
Okay, so is it safe to say you're adapting to something that's already happening?
Yes.
And you're mitigating what you think or expect would happen?
Exactly.
Okay, so it's almost like when we say risk mitigation to a project.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I think the reason I was asking this is because I specifically saw another statistic. I was looking at data last night, and they were saying that nature-based solutions have the potential to address about 37% of the climate mitigation targets that were set for 2030. And I just remember reading that and thinking, I don't know what this means. What does this actually mean? So basically it's saying, if I understood that correctly, it's saying that if we were to look at nature as a way to solve for some of the issues that we are experiencing, we have a likelihood of being able to reach 37% of the goals that we had to plan for the future climate crises, if I can even call it that. Okay. Now I wanna bring this even further back to back home. What is like how? What are the opportunities that you see, especially as someone who works within this space? What are the opportunities that you see for Tanzania in the implementation of nature-based solutions, especially outside, let's say, things like agriculture? I know obviously with your work at Axum, I hope I'm saying it right. It's like Axum. Okay. You guys work in like 9 different locations, Middle East, Africa. What are some of the learnings and also what are some of the opportunities that you see for Tanzania specifically?
Yeah. So I leave agriculture alone because everyone probably focuses on that. The other 2 really promising areas for nature-based solutions, actually, I'd say 3, is one in forestry. We have some of the largest forest covers on the continent, both forest protection as well as new forest creation, right? So planting trees and keeping trees that are there to survive. Then the other one is with blue economy and particularly mangroves, particularly as a risk mitigation to flooding.
Okay.
In fact, we're seeing very interesting models across the continent of insurance players being the ones financing project development for mangrove restoration because a lot of them have properties that they've insured that are under risk by flooding. So instead of preparing to pay for a large premium payout when this person gets flooded, which you know is coming, why don't I invest that into a mangrove project? I can sell carbon credits, get some revenue from that pays for the project, and that prevents me to pay a premium upfront, right? The other one I would say is with green-gray infrastructure, which is how do you think about infrastructure as we have it, but making it more resilient to climate change, right? So how do you think about roads, but not just building roads, ensuring the drainage is there, right? So those are sort of 3 opportunities, but also 3 areas of a lot of risk, which makes sense for us to focus on. A few things I would say, though, is there's still some disconnect between some of these opportunities and real live on ground execution. Partly because there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
Where the models have been established and some finance exists, local actors who are the best people to develop the solutions lack access to it. Whether it is saying, if you have some of these large climate facilities who offer multi-million ticket sizes, there's a question of how does this get to the small SME in rural Geita, right? And what sometimes this leads to is a world where a lot of project development is done by people who don't look like you and me. People, and it's okay if they don't look like you and me, but if those people are sort of focused and care about the country and the landscapes they're working in, they're integrated there because there's sustainability there, right?
Correct.
Versus you get these people who fly in for a project, fly out. Next thing, when there's a pandemic and they're gone, people are stuck thinking, where is the project developer, and projects fail, right? So there's still some work between connecting these established models and financing and on-ground execution.
This episode of Sustainability Bongo is brought to you by CEO Roundtable in partnership with IECN via the Resolve NbS initiative. Under its business and sustainability agenda, the CEO Roundtable has been working with the private sector in integrating sustainability in their respective business strategies. The Resolve NbS initiative is a very practical way of showing how nature-based solutions can create real impact right here in Tanzania. We're so proud to have them as our partners on this journey as we decode Tanzanians' sustainability story. I want us to talk about the financing bit, but before we do that, you said something which really caught my attention, right? The example you gave about insurance companies, right? It almost feels to me like maybe one of the hacks would be to have people have something to get from whatever it is that you're, agendering for, if that's even a word. Because the example you gave is near perfect in that this person who's thinking about, I don't want to pay a hefty premium, they are now taking the proactive step of saying, okay, we're going to plant so-and-so, or we're going to do this to make sure that these properties don't get damaged. But then also in doing so, we're also putting ourselves in a situation where we can play into the carbon market. So I think I'm just thinking out loud here. Do you think maybe if we were able to find a way to have similar structures even in other areas and in other sectors, that maybe there would be better buy-in to this conversation?
And part of my job is sort of engaging corporates, and we've done a lot of this engagement across the continent. And where we get traction is where there is that value proposition. And my belief is a solution is only a solution if it's relevant for the challenges you face, right? So I can't go to everyone and pitch the same solution, right? So sometimes, for instance, other examples is an FMCG company who depends on water from a certain water catchment area, right? I make sodas, I source water from this place. I am more willing to invest in a water project in that catchment area because it provides for quality supply of my product, right? Regulation is another one, although regulations are behind the pace. But sort of, we know that, for instance, now the EU has put EU deforestation regulations, EU DFR, where products have to certify that they're deforestation free, right? Now, not all of a sudden, but we're seeing increasing spike of actors who are exporters of cocoa who are like, oh guys, how do we now put in systems? Do we put buffer zones between us and the forest? Because there's a market mechanism that's pushing them there, right? Part of the job we need to do as people who support the ecosystem is ensuring that these models are validated and scaled and linked to the right people.
Do you just on that same point, do you think we have the kind of expertise do we have people who can do that, who can create value propositions?
We have a couple. We have not a couple. We have a lot of projects on ground who are doing it. We have everyone from those mangroves projects I've told you. Right now, they're not being financed by insurance, but they are working there. So we have players AF4 in Zanzibar, Good Carbon. I can name 20 names.
Right.
We have agroforestry projects. One I'm supporting actually going full circle is 2 hours out of Arusha with smallholder farmers thinking about how they can use agroforestry, get carbon credits, but also tree products and increased yields. So there are people who are already doing this. I think a challenge is how do we allow those people to scale quickly, because the pace we are moving at, even though they're trying, is behind where we need to be to meet our targets by 2030. And a large part of that is how do you finance capacity building for them. So you may have the skills. How do we get 5 other people like you so you could 5x your projects? How do we actually get you the financing to start that nursery farm? So that part really needs to be fixed, and it's usually a function of, can you finance it, and is there an enabling environment, particularly policies that allow for it? And then there's some visibility and coordination work that needs to happen.
Right.
But the people who are developing solutions are there.
Okay. So if we have the people and we have the resources as well, one thing that you mentioned, which I hope I got you correctly, is that there is that gap between the people and the resources and the finances to put these resources to work. So from your experience working in the space, what are some of the opportunities or challenges that you see in being able to access these fundings?
I will say it's an opportunity, because I want listeners, particularly those in our financial sector, to listen to this.
Okay.
Is that historically the financing has been sitting in the global north. The financing, the technical capacity, and there's been a lack of local intermediaries or local actors who are playing that part. It's changing. So we've seen it. CRDB was the first Tanzanian institution to be certified by the Green Climate Fund. They've launched their green bond. It was oversubscribed by 400%. Right. So the financing is there, right? And ideally now we're actually moving to domestic resource mobilization of this, right? So there's a part of saying, who are the actors? And I know the other banks are also looking at climate financing, and I hope we see more and more of them come in. Even the insurance players. The challenge with our insurance is a lot of our insurance players are aggregators. They don't offer themselves. And you have to develop products, and that new product development is something that requires both commitment at the group level as well as that expertise. There's people like FSD Tanzania who are helping intermediate financial players build those products, but we still need to be building buy-in, particularly at the corporate leadership level, for this product development. So that's one big area of opportunity. The intermediary element is something that a lot more players are doing it. We'd launched the first biodiversity accelerator on the continent. And now we work with others to then say, how do we think about these ecosystems as we run our different accelerators and creating joint value proposition across all? I think the coordination function, particularly for Tanzania, has been lacking previously. We created a climate network to partly play that function, but it requires a lot of coordination. It's not just the project developers, it's the government, it's the financiers, and that is something that's going to progress as the days go by, I hope.
Okay. You said something, again, you're saying a lot of things that I really want to get back to. The first biodiversity accelerator, what does that mean?
So when people talk about climate solutions, going back to your point around adaptation and mitigation, just some useful nuances. Most funding goes to mitigation because the business models I was talking about have been developed, and a lot of them are driven by carbon markets.
Right.
If you're mitigating, if I am preventing carbon, someone is going to pay me for that if I can measure it and report it. The measuring and reporting part is very expensive, so it requires some scale. As a small farmer, I can't, but maybe if I and 200 other farmers come together, we can do it, right? But as long as you can measure it and report it, you'll get paid for it. Because of that, it's easy to finance. Like I put money in, I know you're going to sell a credit at this price, you'll pay me back by that, right? Now, adaptation is harder because adaptation is about helping people survive. Now, helping these small people survive doesn't have a lot of money associated with it, right? Like, think of that smallholder farmer who can barely feed themselves. Even as you help them adapt, they're not going to have money to pay you for that, right? So, not a lot of money flows into adaptation, and a lot of calls now, as a continent, is actually for the whole global actors to come together and make commitments around financing adaptation. But then when we come back to thinking through how you take that financing and make it more, what's the word, fungible, which is, how do I innovate on a financial product so we avoid this issues of aggregation, right? Because that's how we actually get it to really small farmers. The interesting part is the opportunities we're seeing across the continent. One really interesting model is, how do you think about a tree as an asset? So assuming there's value to a tree, so I'm growing a timber tree, for instance, right? I know at 15 years, this tree will be this volume and I'll get this volume of wood, hence this amount, right? Now, it doesn't mean that year 15 is when the value reached, is you slowly get up to that value. Now, is there a reason why I can't go to a farmer and finance them on year 5 based off growth at year 5 so they can do other things with that? You actually turn it into an asset. It can be collateralized. They can get a financing back off it. So some of those interesting models are happening, but it's still going to take some time to sort of translate that funding directly there.
So, okay, so hang on. So again, you've said really interesting things, which for me, the key thing you said there is people are more willing to put money in mitigation than they are about adaptation. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's this carbon market, right? And for the listener who maybe is thinking to themselves, what are these guys talking about? My understanding is that I am mitigating for the future, and I want to be able to show how I can offset emissions, let's say, for someone else who's willing to buy credit from me. Meaning, let's use a simple example. You're making a product, you're burning something to make that product. Fumes are going up, carbon dioxide is going up. I'm planting a tree, for instance, as an example. I have farms, and my trees and the farms are taking your carbon dioxide, so you're paying me for me taking that carbon dioxide that you put. Is that a good way to simplify it, just for okay.
So on the demand side, there are people whose activities release carbon, and they want to offset it. And they offset it by buying credit from someone who has either avoided more carbon coming in, or has captured carbon, or has, it's those two. Like I usually use a charcoal stove, for instance, and then you come and give me a clean cooking stove. I used to release carbon every time I cook. Now there's a carbon I'm saving. You can then take that and turn it into a product and sell it. Right? So that's how the carbon market works. But the challenge has been capitalism, money flows the market. So carbon markets have been saturated. Why there's more money for mitigation than adaptation. What we're trying to do with biodiversity is, could we also create a mechanism that also values biodiversity? Because those are different. Carbon is CO2. Biodiversity is ecosystem health. So the richness of flora and fauna, of plants and animals and species, and the health of that ecosystem. So we're also trying to ensure that this thing also gets valued and paid for in a certain way. Because otherwise, you max out on carbon, and sometimes that has a negative implication on biodiversity. So for instance, one of the most popular carbon projects is historically people used to monocrop eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is a very popular tree. You can use it. Its timber is valuable. So 15 years, it's sequestering carbon, and then you can still sell it. Double whammy, right? So people got all of these large places of land, planted monocrops eucalyptus. Now, eucalyptus is really bad if it's monocrop, because one, it's not really great for birds. So if you have bird species, those will decline, right? And monocropping is also really bad for soil health. Exactly, because you need nutrients. Right? So you see a model that was a solution, but it marks on carbon without factoring this other thing, leading to actually harm than benefit, right? So what we're trying to do with BIRA is to say, okay, how do we also get biodiversity valued and rewarded?
So, okay, I have a curious question there, because it seems to me like, and I was telling you off camera about how I was watching a video and they were talking about people who speak fluent Gabonese. And I think the essence of that particular video was that this person was saying that maybe what is wrong or not so right about these conversations is they've been commercialized to an extent that it's undoing the initial reason behind it. So would you say what biodiversity acceleration or efforts in that space, how do we at least think about it from a place where it doesn't also become the thing that we're seeing on this other side?
So it is, and this is very true. And the commercialization element and sort of the seeking for as much margins as you can is why a lot of frustrations people who are exposed to carbon projects have is you'll hear people who have felt this think of carbon projects as land grabs. And let's be honest about it. That's what most people think on the continent, right? And that's driven by the fact that historically most people would say, how do I run this project like a company, which is I'm going to lower my costs, try as much as possible to maximize my revenues and run a product that's consistent and scale it across different contexts, right? What we try to do is think about safeguards. So when we assess organizations before we start supporting them and building investment readiness, there's a set of things we look at, including impact both on nature and climate, so carbon, biodiversity. We also look at social impact, which is something that is very important increasingly. Have you gotten free, prior, informed consent from those people who live there to do your project? How do you think about benefit sharing in a way that is meaningful? And what we push our carbon projects to do is to become high quality carbon projects, because a lot of what happens is when you're high quality project, you get high prices, and high prices make revenue sharing more meaningful, right? So if I'm paying you $5 a credit, and a lot of some of these bulk credits are sold at those prices, $5-10, and you're splitting it 50-50, it's $2.50 between the project developer and the farmer. But if I'm getting $35 per credit, which is sort of where we're seeing some of the smallholder Tanzanian projects actually get some of these prices, 10%, if I'm giving you 10%, and we don't encourage 10%, but as an example, 10% of that is still 3.5, which is more than the 2.5 you are getting at 50 for 50, right? So it's about how do you become a good enough project that you get good enough prices, and then how do you meaningfully share the rewards of that work with the local community. There is, though, a dynamic which is something to I don't have an answer for, but it is commercialization allows scale. Right? To the point you made, our approach is to think about how can you help these people commercialize while ensuring safeguards that they're still achieving a net positive outcome. Because there's a certain world where, and I think it's still useful because some of these models are not ready to be commercial, right? Those still require philanthropic support. But there's only so much philanthropic support can do.
That is, okay. I wanna take this back a little bit, just for the listener who maybe is also listening and still thinking, what are these guys talking about? Are you able to share maybe a case study, or you don't have to disclose any details that you don't need to, but I'm really looking for like a Tanzanian example in simple language that can demonstrate, one of these carbon market situations.
A good one, I'll give you. So there's a carbon developer in northern Tanzania called the Kilimanjaro Project. They have a program, an agroforestry program that's built off this thing called the TIST model. As you do carbon project development, there's different frameworks and models you take to basically measure and report it. And this model was made specifically for smallholder farmers. So they're working with this model to do agroforestry. But part of the mechanisms they have is they think of indigenous trees, right? So when people think trees, let me go plant a mango tree because I love mangoes. But if a tree is not indigenous, it can cause more harm than good. So what their model does is they look at indigenous agroforestry trees. But the innovation there is to think about what are indigenous trees that are actually superfoods. So the trees, for instance, an oyster nut. Oyster nut is very indigenous in this part of Arusha Pangani Basin. It is a global superfood, but it's one of those things because there's no buyers here. There's just trees that stay, and kids sometimes use those oyster nuts, but there's no value chain, no supply chain developed there. So what they've done is they do the agroforestry. So they come to farmers who are doing their own thing, planting maize. Let's help you plant a few trees. They give you the seedling. The oyster nut is a superfood, and they found global buyers who come in and buy those products. So they're already getting a value out of an indigenous local tree, which is also sequestering carbon. And they've also added an ecotourism arrangement to it. So they have, because they're in a tourist hot zone, they have a sort of tree per bed night campaign where guests at certain hotels, you know, when you're live and you say, welcome, Mr. Christopher, and then there's like, one of those is like, do you want to donate a tree, right? And that funding goes back to sort of paying for ecotourism, and they have tours at the sort of nurseries and farms. So it's a model that allows the operator themselves to be profitable because they have this ecotourism revenues. They've been able to 4x the incomes of local farmers, both from increased yields, the tree products, so the oyster nut, for instance, and the carbon credits.
Okay. So in simple language, yani kwa urahisi zaidi ni kwamba kuna wakulima wanakuwa encouraged kupanda oyster nuts. And then there is a system around it where even the people who, let's say, visit hotels and things like that in Arusha also have an ability to partake into that project, also to visit these places so that revenue is also generated. So it works out for everyone.
Exactly.
And the project developer is, I'm assuming, the person that is responsible for measuring and all of these things.
Measuring, usually you do, a third party will come and do it, but they're in charge of the whole project. So they put the project design documents together, they go get verification, they get the seedlings, they work with farmers, they go get buyers, and they negotiate prices, and they arrange sort of the payments to both local communities and government.
Okay. Man, I really want to go deeper into these things, but I want to ask you something, right? Yeah. And again, the essence of this podcast is to speak to the person who is thinking, sustainability, bongo bana, right? Yeah. And so I really want to understand, as someone who is in this space, what are some practical steps that someone who maybe is not already thinking about the things that we're talking about, what are some practical things that they can either research or consider doing, especially around nature-based solutions, from your perspective?
I think the first thing would be to be outside more often. A love of nature is usually, I think, the first thing to really getting into nature-based solutions, and nature is its best advocate. Go outside, hug a tree, go on a hike, you know. But I think coming out of that, both reading about nature-based solutions, IUCN has a great library of these resources. The CEO Roundtable is going to be putting something specifically for Tanzania as well, and we'll think about actually making that available in Swahili as well, so everyone can access it. Listen to this podcast.
Let's go.
But coming out of that, I think it's personal reflection, right? I think sometimes sustainability is seen as this foreign word, but as humans, I would like to think we all are driven by sustainability. As a father, I tend to think I want to leave my child better off than where I was, right? But sometimes we tend to focus on financially, or like the education path I had. I went to this school, I wanted to go to a better school, right? But then if you were to step back and think about it, there's probably other things you care about to live for your kids, right? You want them to be able to go outside and play, right? Like right now, my kids can't play at 2 p.m. because the sun is just really hot, right? And as you start thinking about these things, then start thinking about solutions. Actually, if my kids can't play at 2, do I now plant a tree or a couple of trees that gives them at least a place where it's shaded and they can sit outside and play in the middle of the day? Nature-based solutions, right? And I think that's the best way to get into nature-based solutions, which is a reflection of what challenges do I face? And then, how can I do something? It doesn't have to be this big farm, but a small thing I can do internally to be able to get my life to be better, or leave the world a better place in my own way.
That makes sense. I think as you were saying that, I was testing my knowledge to see if I understood. So if I'm planting a tree so that my kids have shade, that would be adaptation, and not
It is. So actually, that can count as both.
Okay.
Because you're helping your kids adapt to hotter temperatures, but that tree also, as grow, it holds carbon, right? So it's mitigating as well. Yeah.
Okay. Syakaa, I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I wish we had more time. But before we wrap this up, I want to ask you something that I ask all the guests, but I'm going to ask it differently. What is one myth about climate change that you would like the listener to let go of?
Oh, this is a difficult one.
We have time.
I think the biggest thing, and we do this a lot, is I preach this a lot.
Yeah.
Is we tend to sometimes assume these things have been figured out, and when they're handed to us, we run with them as it was handed to us, right? Historically, because the discourse around climate change started in the global north, even ESG, sometimes we've tended to run with it and just go. I think that has caused sometimes more harm than good. Because trends change, right? So right now there's an anti-ESG movement in the US driven by the current government, right? Now you have to think, okay, if I now start scrapping all my ESG, what happens in 2 years when the administration there changes and someone comes and says, no, we have to do ESG, right? So ownership of being able to take this framework and see it as a tool and see, okay, how do I adapt it to what I need ensures actual sustainability. And secondly is we have different lived realities, right? And our lived reality requires us to think of climate alongside the challenges we face, right? Sometimes people may come and say, there's those among us in the climate space that would argue, why are we using fossil fuels? Let's stop importing oil at all and move to all electric, right? Rapid decarbonization usually is the word they use for it. Now, it is fair that we should be decarbonizing, but decarbonization has to happen with the lived realities of people. If there are kids in Sengerema in Mwanza who don't have access to light and lead through a kerosene lamp, you're not going to tell them to wait until they get a solar to be able to use this thing that they need, right? So for us, it really needs to be an anchor of thinking through climate with our social realities. It can be both something that helps address changes and pushes us to further growth, but it has to be anchored on our realities to make sense.
That I tend to agree with that a lot. So I currently drive a hybrid vehicle, and I only got introduced to it a little over a year ago. And I remember one of the things that I thought was super interesting is because even for me, I didn't fully understand the intricacies of what's the difference between a hybrid electric vehicle and an electric vehicle and a plug-in electric vehicle. And I think to your point, maybe Tanzania might not be ready for plug-in electric vehicles or electric vehicles in general, but there could be a reality where hybrid electric vehicles could. So it's almost like contextualizing what can be done instead of just running with this. And I think you said something which caught my attention. You said trends might change, right? Yeah. And I think whenever I hear the word trend and within the context of sustainability, it's worrying a bit, because to your point, I think we do tend to receive this information almost like the gospel and not realizing that it may not be perfect. It may not understand the nuances that we have hapa Bongo. And I think the takeaway that I have from what you just said is that there is a need to receive things, contextualize them, and then apply them accordingly. Yeah. Okay. This is fantastic, man. I really learned a lot today. I'm going to try and see if I remember everything that you said. But ideally, the number one thing that I picked up, which I think I'd like the listener to also pick up as well, is that nature-based solutions don't have to be as complicated in our minds. Essentially, it's trying to solve challenges using what nature has to offer, I also really loved what you said about the two competitive advantages that we have in Tanzania, which is a young population, but also vast resources that we can use to apply these nature-based solutions, but to also create industries that can allow us to be able to adapt to what is happening, but also mitigate what could happen in the future. Because, again, just going back to what we were saying earlier, the climate crisis is real in Tanzania. There are obvious things that we can see, and there are also not so obvious things as well. So thank you so much for making the time. Thank you for answering my questions as well. I think we definitely need to have like a follow-up episode maybe in the next season or so
Would love to.
to get deeper into the details. Thanks to our lead partners, CEO Roundtable and IUCN, under the Resolve NbS initiative. Together, we've collaborated and brought you the Sustainability Bongo podcast, where we have conversations that help us decode the Tanzanian sustainability story.